Thank you for tuning in. This is a daily report for March 31st here in Korea. I'm Min Sun-hee. In our panel session later on this Thursday, we delve into long-standing cross-border matters as South Korea is poised to usher in a new administration come May. Here first is the pandemic update with our Kwon So-ah. So let's start with the latest COVID-19 tallies.
Sunny, COVID-19 infections have dropped by more than 10,000 from the day before here in Korea. And that's to 320,743 as of 12 a.m. this Thursday. And it also marks an on-week drop by almost 75,000 cases if we compare the figure to exactly a week ago. And it's also quite a drop from the day before, as I said. And the average number of daily infections the past 7 days stands at roughly 320,000. Now let's move over to our map. A little over half of cases on this Thursday have occurred in the metropolitan region. Gyeonggi province has dropped to below 100,000 cases. And meanwhile, we also have 24 cases from abroad, with 10 of those having been detected during the isolation period within the community. And now let's move over to the total number of cases in Korea, which has now hit the 13 million mark. Also, more than 16,000 people in the world, in Korea that is, have lost their lives due to the COVID-19 virus, with the average number of daily deaths recently standing at above 300. And also the number of patients in severe or critical condition has hit an all-time high this Thursday, standing at 1,315. Now, vaccinations are slowing down a little bit as the majority of the population is now fully vaccinated. We've only got a little over 1,100 people who got their first shot the day before, and a little over 1,200 who got their second one. Now on to our booster figures. We've got close to 25,700 people who have been administered with an additional COVID-19 vaccine dose. Now let's move over to the global figures. A little over 1.5 million new infections and 5,244 additional deaths have been added in the past 24 hours as of noon Korea time. And those are the general updates I have for now, but I'll see you back in a bit. Sunny?
All right, so thank you for those tallies. Meanwhile, here in Korea, mounting caseloads of Omicron have also led to greater numbers of people battling long COVID. Our Min Soo-kyun has more.
Quite a few people who've suffered from COVID-19 still experience symptoms even after their release from isolation. Like this man who tested positive last week and is now out of quarantine.
My quarantine is over, but I still have a tickle in my throat, and it's been like that since I got confirmed. I do cough, but it doesn't hurt. It's just that my throat is itchy.
This condition, known as long COVID or post-COVID-19 syndrome, can last for weeks or months. In fact, research shows that most patients will fully recover within 12 weeks, but for some, it may last as long as a year. The most common symptoms appear to be cough, fatigue, chest pain, brain fog, dizziness, and a loss or distortion of smell or taste.
Every day, there are about 10 or more people who come to the hospital with persistent coughs and phlegm, and this is because of inflammation, such as bronchitis and laryngitis, that remain after we're infected with COVID-19.
Developing long-term symptoms, however, does not seem to be necessarily linked to how ill a patient was with COVID-19. British health authorities have said that people who had mild symptoms at first can have long-term problems as well. Similar findings have also been reported in the U.S. While children have been thought to be less vulnerable to the long-term effects of COVID-19, more are now being diagnosed with long COVID. Since anyone can fall victim to post-COVID conditions, here are some tips to ease the symptoms.
We would have to avoid excessive exercise or activities that may interfere with recovery, and avoid beverages like coffee and alcohol. Also, if the symptoms can be eased with medication or treatment, prescription medicine can help.
More than 20% of South Korea's population has now been infected with the virus. The Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency says it soon plans to carry out research on post-COVID conditions, as this could remain a concerning health issue even after the pandemic is over. Min Soo-kyun, Arirang News.
Right, indeed. Long COVID remains a task to be tackled by authorities worldwide. In the meantime, though, we focus on the current infection itself and efforts to contain it on the local front. First then, Min Jung, let's begin with an assessment of the COVID-19 situation here in the country as well as that across the world, according to the World Health Organization.
Sunny, the situation does appear to be improving compared to last week when South Korea reported the most number of infections in the world for the 4th straight week. According to the WHO, South Korea logged more than 2.4 million cases over the latest 7-day period, by far the highest of any country. However, the good news is that weekly cases dropped 13% from the previous week. Looking at the broader picture, the number of global infections fell 14% on week, with around 10,800,000 cases confirmed. Although new infections are on a downward trend worldwide, that's not the case for COVID-19 deaths. The number of global deaths increased 43% on week, with South Korea also seeing a 22% rise in the number of deaths. This could be explained by the fact that the fatalities typically lag behind infections and hospitalizations by a few weeks.
Right, Min Jung. And also here in the country, COVID-19 inoculations, as we have been saying, for children have started on this Thursday, right?
That's right, Sunny. As of today, Korea has started handing out the first vaccines for children aged 5 to 11. Registration opened exactly a week ago, and so far, only 1.3% of the eligible recipients have signed up. There appears to be a great deal of vaccine hesitancy among parents of young children over concerns of possible side effects. Still, health authorities are strongly advising children to get vaccinated, especially those at high risk due to conditions like obesity and weak immune systems. And this is regardless of whether or not they were previously infected with COVID-19. However, shots are not recommended for healthy children who have contracted COVID-19 in the past. Children can get vaccinated at around 1,200 medical centers nationwide, and they will be given smaller doses of the Pfizer vaccine administered twice with an 8-week interval, and they must be accompanied by a legal guardian to ensure their safety. As of Wednesday, close to 1.5 million children in this age bracket contracted COVID-19, resulting in 5 deaths. Thursday's data also showed that around half of Korea's population of kindergartners and elementary school children in the lower grades have contracted COVID-19.
Min Jung, staying with vaccines, I understand Korea's drug regulator is mulling over the distribution of 4th doses here in the country.
Right, Sunny, and this comes after the U.S. authorized second boosters of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines for people aged 50 and above. Korean health authorities say that the latest decision in the U.S. will serve as a guidepost for our own strategy regarding 4th doses. Korea is currently administering second boosters to patients at nursing hospitals and seniors with weakened immune systems. But a health official said Wednesday that the country should consider administering 4th shots to all seniors in general to tackle the rise in severe cases and deaths among the elderly. And as of Wednesday, they accounted for around 94% of all COVID-19 related deaths here in South Korea.
And also, U.S. FDA's Advisory Committee on Vaccines is actually scheduled to hold a meeting next Wednesday where experts are expected to further discuss the future of booster shots in the U.S. And that also may include discussions on whether to expand these second boosters to other age groups. Now, for now, vaccinating healthy adults with a 4th dose remains controversial, but the White House had mentioned on Tuesday that if at some point second boosters are recommended to the entire population, additional funding would be needed. In fact, U.S. President Joe Biden on Wednesday called on Congress to do more to fund the country's vaccination campaign and also secure additional vaccine supplies now as more are becoming eligible for additional booster shots. 79-year-old Biden himself got his 4th Pfizer dose on Wednesday, just a day after authorities gave the green light for a second Pfizer and Moderna booster shots. Biden also mentioned the potential need for new vaccines to deal with new variants, stressing that additional funding would be needed to purchase those.
Right, I see. And before we focus more on the international front, I have one final question for you, Min Jung. What is the latest with regard to our social distancing guidelines, which are poised to end on Sunday?
Well, Health officials appear to be leaning towards an easing of restrictions, including the limits on business hours. Authorities are believed to be weighing several options, one of which may include an extension of business hours to midnight from the current 11 p.m. shutdowns. However, President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol's transition committee is calling on the government to completely abolish all restrictions on business hours. The committee explained that business curfews have had little effect in curbing the outbreak, but said restrictions should be eased gradually otherwise when there is a clear sign of a downward trend. However, some health experts have warned against hasty action as the country continues to witness 300 to 400,000 cases a day. Officials will conduct their final review this afternoon and make an announcement on the fate of our restrictions this Friday.
I see, Min-jung, and that is probably what you will cover for us tomorrow, hopefully. Now, beyond Korea, Soa, the World Health Organization has shared its prospects about the pandemic for this year.
Right, Sunny. The WHO has laid out possible scenarios for how the COVID-19 situation may evolve in this year of 2022 and how the world should continue to respond to the pandemic. Now, in its so-called Strategic Preparedness, Readiness and Response Plan to end the global pandemic in 2022 report, the organization explained strategic adjustments that every country should be making to diminish the impact of the pandemic. The two key objectives were focused on reducing COVID infections and diagnosing and treating cases effectively to reduce fatalities, bolstering surveillance, monitoring healthcare systems and supply, upgrading research, as well as improving global vaccine equity were mentioned in the plan. Hoping for this third response plan of its kind to be the latest, WHO Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus commented on the latest predictions.
Based on what we know now, the most likely scenario is that the virus continues to evolve, but the severity of disease it causes reduces over time as immunity increases due to vaccination and infection.
Right, increased immunity. I suppose that's the silver lining then. So staying in the US, I understand there's some optimistic news for the cruise travel industry there.
That's right, Sunny. The US has lifted its COVID-19 risk warning of cruise travel on Wednesday local time for the first time in 2 years. The CDC released a statement saying travelers will now make their own assessments of transmission risks when they board a cruise ship, similar to what they would do on other means of travel. The COVID-19 cruise ship travel health notice has been removed based on the current state of the pandemic, as well as a decline in infections on cruise ships over the past several weeks. In the past 2 years, the CDC had been raising and dropping travel advisories for cruise travels, which at one time was even at the highest risk level 4 during the surge in the Omicron variant. Meanwhile, officials still advise travelers to make sure that they are vaccinated before boarding on cruise ships, and also for people who have underlying health conditions, they should consult a doctor before traveling on these ships.
Right, so take basic prevention measures as well, of course. Now, so we seem to be covering North Korea quite a bit this week, but according to the latest report, COVID-19, I understand, may prompt a humanitarian crisis there.
Yes, Sunny, and that maybe even within the next 6 months. North Korea was named among a dozen countries that have been included in an analysis by the Geneva-based The Assessment Capacities Project, which evaluated humanitarian risk factors of not only North Korea, but a dozen countries, including Colombia, Ethiopia, the Philippines, and Yemen. In the case of North Korea, a worsening food shortage was referred to, one that could be triggered by an outbreak of COVID-19. The report said if the North faces a COVID-19 crisis, the North Korean regime may strengthen border controls further, and that would deal a heavy blow to the supply of nutrition for its most vulnerable population.
I see. Hopefully it will not go that far then. All right, so as always, thank you very much for that report. And Min-jung, thank you. I'll see you on Friday.
Thank you.
In the US, during his campaign, President Joe Biden called for a no first-use posture with regard to nuclear weapons. This posture, however, has been omitted from the country's official policy. Our Kim Hyo-sun explains.
U.S. President Joe Biden has walked away from what he said was his longtime preferred policy of, quote, no first use of nuclear weapons. According to the 2022 Nuclear Posture Review submitted to the U.S. Congress by the Pentagon, Washington would consider the use of nuclear weapons in extreme circumstances to defend the vital interests of the country, as well as its allies and partners. The report, however, did not elaborate on the conditions it describes as, quote, extreme circumstances. During the 2020 campaign, Biden endorsed the idea of a no first use policy, meaning the U.S. would launch a nuclear weapon only in response to a nuclear attack. This, however, was met with concerns from Europe and other U.S. allies. Biden's policy shift could have been impacted by the increased possibility of Russia's use of nuclear arms against Ukraine, signs of an imminent nuclear test by North Korea, and China's massive nuclear expansion. The three-paragraph summary also states the U.S. is committed to reducing the role of nuclear weapons. It also explains the U.S. will seek to reduce its nuclear arsenal, starting with a new missile introduced under the former Trump administration. The Pentagon adds a full classified version of the report would be made available in the near future. Kim Hye-sun, Arirang News.
In Eastern Europe, Russia appears to be realigning its military offensive in Ukraine, while the U.S. remains doubtful about any meaningful de-escalation in the former's hostile campaign. Our Ji-young reports.
Russia says it is regrouping its forces to focus on the liberation of the breakaway region of Donbas in the east and other key fronts.
In the directions of Kyiv and Chernihiv, a planned regrouping of troops is taking place. The purpose of regrouping our armed forces is to focus on key fronts and, first of all, to complete the total liberation of Donbas.
This comes a day after Russia promised to scale back its military presence, while on Wednesday Moscow's military continued shelling the capital Kyiv and the northern city of Chernihiv. The Pentagon said Russia has begun repositioning only a small percentage of troops away from the Kyiv area.
We've seen them begin to reposition less than 20%, our assessment today. And we think some of them, not all, but some of them have already moved into Belarus. If the Russians are serious about de-escalating, because that's their claim here, then they should send them home.
The United Nations says more than 4 million people have now fled from their homes in Ukraine since the war broke out in February. It also reported 3,090 civilian casualties in Ukraine, including more than 1,000 deaths as of Monday. Amid the Russian bombardment, U.S. President Joe Biden pledged to provide a further $500 million in aid for Ukraine. During a phone call on Wednesday, Biden said that the U.S. with allies and partners are identifying additional capabilities to help the Ukrainian military defend its country. Meanwhile, Germany said Russian President Vladimir Putin has backed off his demand for payment for gas in rubles, saying that European buyers can keep paying for gas in euros. Ji-young, Arirang News.
In other news, researchers here have marked a new milestone in space technology by successfully test launching a solid fuel rocket earlier on Wednesday. Our Ji has details.
A rocket blasts off into space at a testing site in Taean, located on the west coast of South Korea. On Wednesday, the country successfully test-fired its solid fuel space rocket for the first time. This comes 8 months after successfully conducting the combustion test of a solid-propelled engine in July last year. South Korean researchers were able to speed up the development of the solid fuel rocket after the country and the U.S. agreed in May last year to end restrictions on Seoul's ballistic missile and rocket development. The country's defense ministry said after going through additional tests, the homegrown rocket will be launched carrying an actual satellite. Eventually, it'll be used to put a small satellite or a number of ultra-small satellites into orbit. Wednesday's test verified the rocket's key technologies, including large solid fuel engine, fairing separation, and stage separation, and was observed by the nation's defense minister, Seok. Also, the test comes less than a week after North Korea managed to conduct its ICBM launch last Thursday, scrapping its self-imposed moratorium. In reference to the North's recent move, the defense ministry said Seoul's successful test launch is an important milestone in gaining power.
At a critical time with North Korea's recent launch of an ICBM, the successful test launch of the solid fuel space rocket is an important milestone in strengthening our military's defense power of space-based surveillance and in the reconnaissance field.
This is not the first time that South Korea tested a domestically built rocket. In October 2021, South Korea conducted a test launch of its liquid-fueled rocket called Duri. Although Duri failed to fully place a dummy satellite into orbit after liftoff, it marked a meaningful step in the country's space development. Unlike Duri, a solid-fuel rocket like the one tested on Wednesday is simpler and less expensive to develop and manufacture. It can also be launched faster than a liquid-fuel rocket. Peunji, Arirang News.
Also, on the local front, the city of Chungju is taking tangible steps to go green via a project that makes efficient use of food waste to fuel hydrogen cars. Our Ishihu was there.
On Wednesday, the city of Chungju in Chungcheongbuk-do province celebrated the completion of South Korea's first green hydrogen refueling station that uses biogas. Chungcheongbuk-do province and the city of Chungju, as well as the Institute for Advanced Engineering, took part in the project that took around 3 years to complete. The station produces hydrogen using biogas emitted from food waste collected at Chungju City's Food Bioenergy Center. The food waste goes through filters and a fermentation process before turning into biomethane gas. It is then mixed with water and hydrogen is extracted from the mixture. The hydrogen is then purified so it can be used as fuel for hydrogen cars. This project allows around 500 kilograms of hydrogen to be produced per day at a station for the first time in Korea. That's enough hydrogen to fill about 100 hydrogen vehicles. Seawater, wind, and solar energy found in coastal and offshore environments are used to produce hydrogen. But as Chungcheongbuk-do is a landlocked province, it's difficult for petrochemical complexes or LNG supply bases to be built. Previously, natural gas-based hydrogen had to be produced in places like Daesan, Yeosu, or Ulsan and was transported to Chungju, which was expensive.
Natural gas-based hydrogen can be produced only in certain regions, but food waste can be collected anywhere, therefore making it possible to produce hydrogen regardless of location.
The station will serve as what's called a mother station that will charge both hydrogen cars and tube trailers that can carry hydrogen fuel to other charging stations.
It's about 27% cheaper to create hydrogen from biogas compared to creating it from natural gas. We hope that our method of extracting hydrogen serves as a model for similar projects around the country. We also hope that the citizens can drive hydrogen cars at a lesser cost.
The fact that the price of hydrogen is not affected by international oil prices will enable stable supply and demand and without price fluctuations.
Because this is eco-friendly, as a driver, I feel like I'm making an environmental contribution. It's also convenient how it can be charged in a short amount of time.
The province will continue to engage in more eco-friendly projects to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, according to its governor. Lee Si-woo, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Fans got a taste of what's to come later this winter at the 2022 Qatar World Cup as fans from different nations gathered in Doha Wednesday at a flag-raising ceremony for the qualified teams. Included were the flags of countries like Portugal, Ecuador, Morocco, Tunisia, and Ghana, who are all late qualifiers for the competition. Meanwhile, the official football for the Qatar World Cup was revealed as Al-Rila, or the Journey in Arabic, was unveiled for the first time. FIFA claims that the ball travels faster in flight than any other in the tournament's history. The ball will embark on a journey to 10 cities across the world, including stops in Dubai, Mexico City, and New York. Staying with football, Barcelona set a world record for attendance at a women's football match, as over 91,000 fans watched Barcelona beat rivals Real Madrid 5-2 in Wednesday's Champions League quarterfinal second leg. A total of 91,553 fans packed the Camp Nou, breaking the previous record from 1999 when over 90,000 fans watched the World Cup final between the United States and China at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, while over 110,000 people attended Denmark's win over Mexico at the Azteca Stadium in the 1971 World Cup final. The tournament was not officially sanctioned and is not considered an official record attendance. A UK lawmaker in Prime Minister Boris Johnson's Conservative Party on Wednesday has opened up on plans to change gender identity, becoming the country's first openly transgender member of Parliament. 37-year-old Jamie Wallace, addressing Parliament, spoke of being diagnosed with gender dysphoria and shared a detailed personal history of experiences that led to the decision. The statement was met with messages of support from the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, and other members of Parliament. Actor Bruce Willis, known for his role in the Die Hard franchise, announced he will retire from acting. According to a statement released by his family on Wednesday, Willis decided to retire after being diagnosed with aphasia, an illness that impacts cognitive ability. The condition affects an individual's ability to speak and write. Fans all around the world expressed shock and sadness, sending tributes to Willis on social media. The 67-year-old has won 1 Golden Globe and 2 Emmys during his illustrious career. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Up next, we shed light on foreign media coverage of events here in this part of the world. As always, I have Kim Sung-yeon in the studio. Sung-yeon, it's been a week. Welcome back.
Great to see you, Sunny. So today we have international coverage regarding South Korea's Living with COVID-19 scheme, how that's been unrolling here. Also, North Korea's weapons development and a story on Japan's controversial new history textbooks, as well as inflation expectations in Korea reaching the highest level since 2014. So let's dive right in. The Wall Street Journal says Korea's current COVID-19 wave is the largest that any developed country has experienced, but the country has stopped trying to halt the spread of the virus. Instead, the journal highlighted that Korea is considering downgrading the threat level of COVID-19, with health officials even saying the latest mass outbreak was essential as a matter of fact. Officials added that the recent outbreak was a test of faith for Korea in its bid to categorize COVID-19 as a less severe disease.
Moving forward, Sung-yeon, I hear theories are abundant with regard to North Korea's latest intercontinental ballistic missile test, right?
Right, Sunny. A report talks about how why it believes North Korea has conducted the ICBM test at this time in particular, highlighting that with the latest test, the North has indeed demonstrated progress in its weapons development as the missile flew higher and further than ever before. The interpreter also mentions that the tested missiles so far provide evidence that the reclusive state's ICBMs can put all of the U.S. within range. It further explains that the timing of the test shows that there are political calculations in play by North Korea. There's belief that the North may have seen a window of opportunity to exploit since the world's attention is mostly focused on the Ukraine crisis right now. Another belief is that the North is taking advantage of the power transition that is taking place in South Korea. And Pyongyang may believe that Seoul is not capable of mounting a sort of firm response as it goes through an internal power shift.
Staying with North Korea, Sung-yeon, I believe there is also talk about a possible nuclear test in the near future.
Yes, it's an alarming report. It's saying that some new activities having been spotted, indicating that a nuclear test by North Korea may take place imminently in the near future. So UPI highlights that according to new satellite imagery, increased activity has been seen at North Korea's Punggye-ri nuclear test site, which suggests Pyongyang may be getting ready to conduct its 7th nuclear test. A report by Research Institute Open Nuclear Network, a Vienna-based institute, has said that new developments have been identified at the site since last December, including signs of excavation, construction, and more traffic. An analyst said that such movements show that the North has reactivated some parts of its nuclear weapons test site. Now, Pyongyang had dismantled the Pyongyari test site in May of 2018 after declaring a freeze on long-range missiles and nuclear tests before the North lifted its self-imposed moratorium by launching an ICBM just last week.
Right, last Thursday, March 24th to be precise. Moving on, Song-yeon, Korea's response to Japan's efforts to whitewash wartime atrocities has also made international headlines.
Yes, Sunny, Seoul says the new textbooks in Japan are distorting facts about Japan's use of forced labor as well as sexual slavery that affected Koreans during the Second World War. Now, UPI writes that the Foreign Ministry here has expressed deep regret over the new textbooks in Japan, which have been approved by Japanese authorities to be used by second and third year high school students starting in the year 2023. The report explains that according to Korean officials, expressions such as forced labor have been watered down and instead described as conscription or mobilization, while references to sex slaves have also been downplayed. UPI further mentions that some historians believe nearly 200,000 girls and women were used as sex slaves by Japan during World War II. In the meantime, the article adds that Seoul also protested against the new textbook's claims on the Dokdo Islands, that the islands are Japanese territory which Korea is occupying illegally.
Song-yeon, finally on the economy, foreign media has also covered public concerns here in the country over inflation.
Right, Sunny. So consumer inflation expectations hit an 8-year high in Korea, particularly with the Ukraine crisis, leading to supply chain disruptions as well as rising energy prices. So Bloomberg said that according to the BOK, price expectations this month accelerated to 2.9%, which is up by 0.2 percentage points compared to a month ago. Bloomberg explained that this outlook puts more pressure on the BOK to rein in inflation as well as break a potential cycle of wage and price increases. The report further pointed out that Korea's central bank is facing the inflation challenge in the middle of a leadership transition, with a new BOK governor having been nominated last week, who has yet to undergo weeks of parliamentary hearings. Meanwhile, Bloomberg also elaborated that Korea is among the developed countries hardest hit by the ripple effects of the war in Ukraine, as the nation relies heavily on imported energy.
All right, Song-yeon, as always, thank you very much for the coverage.
Thank you for having me.
A week ago, that was last Thursday, North Korea test-fired an intercontinental ballistic missile, essentially ending a self-imposed moratorium on long-range testing that had been in place since the year 2017. For more on issues pertaining to the Korean Peninsula, I have Professor Min Jung-hoon from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy here in the studio. Professor Min, it's a pleasure to have you back.
My pleasure.
I also have Professor Mason Ritchie at the Hankuk University of Foreign Studies live on the line. Professor Ritchie, again, it's a pleasure to speak with you.
Great, thanks. Happy to be here.
Right, we'll start here in the studio then. Professor Min, let's start with your interpretation of North Korea's latest display of defiance.
Well, basically, I think that North Korea's the recent ICBM test is the signal that North Korea want to reset the nuclear talks with the United States. As you know, the current nuclear talks between North Korea and U.S. Have been maintained since 2018. And suspending North Korea's nuclear test and the long-range missile tests have functioned as the red line for the negotiation. So the two countries have recognized that not crossing the red line is the bottom line, that they want to remain in the negotiation. But as you know, since they failed to reach an agreement in the 2019 Hanoi summit, there has been no progress in the negotiation. And North Korea made it clear that it could return the negotiation only when U.S. takes back its hostile policy against North Korea. But U.S. has not taken any serious or the meaningful measure for relieving economic sanctions or the security guarantee for North Korea. And finally, the Conservative Party will take power in South Korea, and it means that South Korea's policy on North Korea will likely change in the coming years. So taken together, I think North Korea perceives that it doesn't need to keep the current negotiation setting because it's very difficult for the nuclear talks to make a progress under the current negotiation setting. So I think that North Korea want to reset the negotiating setting by crossing the red line, and it also want to make a new negotiation environment that could be favorable to North Korea. And I think the Ukraine crisis also contributed to the North Korea's making decision to cross the red line, because the relationships among U.S. and Russia and China got worse in terms of the Ukraine crisis. And North Korea, in terms of that kind of the conflicts among the world powers, North Korea could have a higher probability or possibility that Russia and China would be on each side in the international stage.
Right, so North Korea essentially is seeking to secure some kind of leverage then. Professor Richard, there's also been a bit of talk about the type of ICBM that was test-fired on the 24th of March. North Korea claims it was a Hwasong-17, but South Korea insists it was a Hwasong-15, while the US, for its part, says analysis is still underway. How do you explain the US's cautious stance?
Well, I guess the first thing is we probably don't know everything. The second point I think it's important to remember is that intelligence collection and analysis is complicated and difficult work sometimes, so it might take some time and there might be some differing perspectives. I think what appears to be most likely is that the March 24th ICBM launch was in fact a Hwasong-15 that was misrepresented by the Kim regime as a Hwasong-17 to make up for domestic propaganda purposes. The failed March 16 Hwasong-17 launch, which exploded in the vicinity of the airspace above Pyongyang and was potentially even visible to parts of the population in North Korea. So I think that this, most likely faked video of the Hwasong-17 launch on the 24th was presumably for domestic propaganda purposes. But I think it really opens up an interesting question, which is if the North Koreans were willing to lie about this domestically, but yet probably would have to know that this fabrication of the launch on the Hwasong-17 on the 24th would be known by the international intelligence community. What else might North Korea have lied about that's a bit less visible and more opaque, such as re-entry vehicle survivability, warhead compactness and lightness, and missile guidance? I think it throws into question in part some elements of the credibility of their nuclear deterrent. I mean, just to be clear, I do think that they have an ICBM that can reach the United States, but there might be some reevaluation of exactly how sophisticated their nuclear and missile program actually is.
Right, a valid point, of course. Meanwhile, Professor Min, what then can you tell us about the differences between a Hwasong-17 and a Hwasong-15?
Well, but basically, I think it's not clear if North Korea succeeded in the launching Hwasong-17, which is called the monster ICBM at this point of time. But it seems to be clear that North Korea's the ICBM capability has been advanced over the years. Of course, there is the technological differences between the two types of missiles. The Hwasong-17 can fly longer and could have the multiple the nuclear warheads on it, or some other technological features. But let alone such kind of the technological differences. I want to point out that at least North Korea succeeded in launching an ICBM this time that at least updated the Hwasong 15. And it confirmed that it can fly over 13,000 kilometers and reach anywhere across the United States. But its re-entry technology and the multiple nuclear warhead technology have not proved yet. And the experts assess that it could take some time before North Korea would possess such technologies, but probably at least 6 months or the year or 2 years. But even so, there's no doubt. We have to remember this kind of thing. There's no doubt that North Korea's missile capabilities, including ICBMs, have made meaningful progress over the years. And North Korea is imposing a serious security threat to the United States and its Asian or regional allies, including South Korea and Japan. Right. That's the big concern.
And beyond missiles, Professor Ritchie, as my colleague Song Yeon mentioned earlier, there are also widespread concerns that North Korea may be preparing for a nuclear test as well. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so there is speculation that North Korea could be preparing for another nuclear test in the tunnels at Punggye-ri. We don't know how long that tunnel preparation might take. We've seen estimates as little as perhaps a month. It could be 3 months. It could be longer. We don't really have much of an estimation of exactly how damaged the tunnels were by the detonations that took place there several years ago. Why would North Korea want to do that? I think the best guess that we have is for nuclear warhead development towards tactical nuclear warheads, either ones that could be more easily fitted onto short-range and medium-range ballistic missiles, or as Professor Min alluded to earlier, with the Hwasong 17, smaller warheads that might be placed on top of the Hwasong 17 as multiple independently retargetable reentry vehicles, or even just multiple, even if not independently targeted reentry vehicles in order to defeat U.S. missile defense assets.
Right. And Professor Min, simply speaking, how do these aggressive actions, if you will, by North Korea look to affect the peace process here on the Korean Peninsula?
Well, personally, I think that although the North Korea's recent ICBM test could reset the current negotiation setting of the nuclear talks, but it doesn't mean that the entire peace process on the Korean Peninsula has gone down the drain. I don't think so, because the current peace process on the Korean Peninsula has got some kind of the impact on the establishing peace regime on the Korean Peninsula or something like that. And I think that once North Korea, US are agreed to resume the nuclear talks in the future, I think it is likely that they will talk about what they want to exchange to make a progress for the denuclearization of North Korea on the basis of what they already achieved from the Panmunjom Declaration and the joint statements of the Singapore Summit in 2018. As you know, the Biden administration revealed its policy on North Korea last year, and it mentioned that it would respect the Panmunjom Declaration. So it seems that the future negotiation between North Korea and US will likely proceed on the agreements of the declarations. Right? So I think what we achieved from the peace process on the Korean Peninsula will contribute to facilitating the nuclear talks in the future. But it's not clear at this point how North Korea and US will narrow down the gaps they have, because neither of them, neither party, want to make a concession first. So that's why I think the North Korea wanted the show of its advanced the ICBM capability this time or the nowadays. I mean, it's a kind of way of enhancing its negotiating power in preparation for the resumption of the talks with the United States in the future.
Right, and speaking about the United States, Professor Richie, earlier this week the Biden administration disclosed its defense spending and strategy plan. What is your assessment of this blueprint amid the host of challenges that the US faces from China, Russia and North Korea?
So let's start with a little bit of budget context. So the 2022 U.S. Department of Defense budget was about $753 billion, to which Congress came back in later and added another $25 billion. So that takes you up to $278 billion, which was the baseline budget that was used for the proposed 2023 budget. So where does the extra $35 billion go to reach the $813 billion figure that the proposed budget from the Biden administration comes from? Some of it comes from Ukraine and Russia putting assumed pressure on U.S. defense to respond to the crisis. And we see that some of the money being earmarked potentially for the European Defense Initiative. Warplanes, more warships. There's also money for additional money for artificial intelligence, for hypersonics, additional communication and command and control developments as well. A lot of the money, however, additional money in this budget comes from nuclear modernization. The U.S. is undertaking a nuclear modernization effort that may end up touching all three of the legs of the triad, and that's very expensive. So I don't actually think that North Korea per se plays much of a role in this. Certainly China does, of course, but a lot of this stuff that's contained in this budget can of course be applied in some way to the larger deterrence effort against North Korea.
Right. Professor Min, it appears that securing solidarity within the UN Security Council against North Korea's belligerence is a daunting task, with countries like Russia and China shying away from stern words of condemnation. What are your thoughts?
Well, so I agree with the point of view that it's really hard for the UN Security Council to make the resolution to put another or the further sanctions against North Korea. I think it's mainly because the U.S.-China strategic competition and the Ukraine crisis are affecting how major players respond to the North Korean provocations. As you know, as the U.S.-China strategic competition has been intensified, the Biden administration tries to mobilize its democratic allies and partners, such as South Korea and Japan, in order to check the rise of China. Meanwhile, China also tries to mobilize its old friends and partners, such as Russia and North Korea, to preserve its influence against the United States. In addition, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has been a momentum that China is strengthening its relationship with Russia. And North Korea is also taking advantage of the U.S.-China strategic competition and the war in Ukraine to strengthen its relationships with Russia and China. And nowadays, it seems that North Korea is also preparing for the long-term confrontation with the United States. So it means that we need to understand North Korea's provocations in the context of the East Asia's overall security situation, where power politics among world powers dominates the regional countries' relationships. So I think we are witnessing that geopolitics is emerging again in East Asia and the Korean Peninsula. That put more pressure or the difficulties in terms of resolving the North Korean problems.
Right. And Professor Richie, do you suppose China and Russia are likely to perhaps maintain such a non-committal stance in the case of a nuclear test by North Korea?
Well, China and Russia won't like a nuclear test. I don't think by North Korea. Privately, I would imagine, especially China, would probably indicate their lack of enthusiasm for a nuclear test to the Kim regime. But I do not expect that their international and United Nations reaction, notably through the Security Council, would be aimed at really restraining North Korea. I also think that we will probably, even regardless of another seventh North Korean nuclear test, see Russia and China significantly enforce sanctions more than they are. In fact, I think we can probably expect things over time to be moving in the opposite direction, where sanctions enforcement by China and Russia on North Korea will become increasingly lax, and it's already not anywhere near completely enforced as it is now.
Right. Professor Min, come early April, a delegation representing the incoming Yoon administration will be departing for the U.S. for talks on issues of bilateral concern. Having said that, what issues do you believe will dominate these talks?
Well, when the delegation fly to Washington, I think they will discuss many agendas. But I think their priority will be how they would strengthen the ROK-US alliance in the coming years. As you know, South Korea and US have successfully maintained the ROK-US alliance over the 70 years. And the President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol has emphasized the importance of the alliance or the relationship with the United States during the presidential campaign. And specifically, his campaign pledges show that his administration will reconstruct the ROK-US alliance and strengthen the comprehensive strategic the relationship with Washington. So in Washington, I think they are likely to exchange their opinions and ideas about how to strengthen the ROK-US alliance under the principle of peace through strength, and how to enhance their cooperation in relation to the U.S.-China strategic competition, like the South Korea potential participation in the vaccine, climate change, and emerging technology working groups under the Quad or something. And regarding North Korean problems, they are likely to focus on how to deter North Korea's the provocations by enhancing the ROK-US the cooperation, such as reconfirming U.S. extended deterrence against North Korea, and revitalizing the joint military exercises between South Korea and the United States, and deploying U.S. strategic assets like B-1B and B-52 bombers to the Korean Peninsula. And last but not least, they are also likely to talk about when they will hold the first summit meeting between South Korea and the U.S. in the coming months.
Right. All right, then, Professor Min, as always, thank you very much for your thoughts today. Professor Ritchie, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts as well.
Thanks for having me.
Right, a rather poignant Russian proverb states, make peace with people and war with your wrongs. Let's now pray for efforts to put these words of wisdom into practice. Thank you for watching.